Thank you so much, Fred Ndemo. We are live from the Central Business District. We're actually at CJ's, a swanky restaurant right here on Koinange Street. And this is where we'll be having the discussion today. Let me introduce my guest in studio. Right here next to me, we have Fatma El-Mawi, who is the CEO of Milestones Resource Solutions. She's also a National Director at the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome to the program.
Sante, morning.
And of course, on my far right, we have Bitange Ndemo, Dr. Bitange Ndemo, an Associate Professor at University of Nairobi, and the Chairperson of the Blockchain Task Force, amongst other titles for both of them, but we'll stick to those for now. Daktari, karibu sana.
Thank you.
Daktari, I'll start with you, and I want to find out from you, we are now roughly 4 months or so to the end of the year. Last year, we know what happened. We had an election year, the economy tanked. What has been your assessment of the economy this year? What are you happy about, but also what are you concerned about?
Well, the projections are that the economy would grow at 6% this year, but there are threats to that growth because of the anticipated tax increases, especially in the transport sector, where the cost is likely to go up, then it pushes inflation, and then we go into a vicious cycle. So I would say it's a mixed bag of everything. The handshake helped to make people begin to think business and not politics. But
as to whether we'll utilize that handshake,
yes,
fully, also is another discussion.
Another discussion. By the end of the year, if the price for gas goes up, we would have a lot of problems.
Okay. Fatma, you come in. What are some of what you've seen as opportunities in 2018, but also challenges?
For me, first, I would like to agree with Daktari. It's the space has opened up. There's optimism. People are looking at investing. We have now, for the time being at least, we have quietened the politics, which is, of course, as a result of the handshake. We are seeing business people coming up and investing again, albeit small. From the chamber where I sit, there's a lot of interest. We have a lot of trade delegations that have come into this country, people that want to invest in this country, and this is good. Having said that, I would also like to agree with Daktari, we also have a challenge. So it's a mixed bag because, again, with the fuel increases going up, the multiplier effects will actually hurt. Another thing that's really of concern for us at the chamber is the energy. Energy is really, the cost of energy is high, and unfortunately we have seen a couple of manufacturing companies that have closed down, and they've actually relocated to Ethiopia. So that is worrying, and that is of concern. And
obviously there have been a lot of discussions about why the cost of energy is so high in this country. Could it be natural reasons? Could it be corruption? And that's something we could talk about a bit later on. But Fatma, staying with you, corruption. The elephant in the room, the revelations in 2018 of how much money has been lost or could have been lost to graft has been simply astounding. I'm sure you've read the papers and so forth. I want to get your thoughts about the manner in which the government is fighting corruption, the manner in which Kenyans themselves are fighting corruption. Are you convinced that we are on the right track?
Again, yes and a no.
Mixed bag all through.
Mixed bag, because what the president is doing is spot on. It's actually very good. And he wants to tackle the elephant that's in the room, that is corruption. But then again, how are we taking it? When somebody does something wrong, as Kenyans, the first thing that we do, we start imagining, huyu mtu anatoka wapi? You know, why are they looking at my tribesman? Why is this thief, maybe they are looking at this Kabila. Does it mean that it is okay for a Swahili or it is okay for a Kikuyu to steal and it is not okay for somebody else? This is one conversation, this is one thing that we should all be together. We should all fight together. It doesn't really matter who steals, who takes. At the end of the day, that resource that is being wasted could have assisted to build a hospital, could have assisted the schools. I mean, we have too many problems, surely. This is one thing we all need to stop, come together and solve this issue.
That's obviously Daktari coming, corruption. And you've written extensively about this.
Yes, the president has done a wonderful job, but the entire system is not talking the same language, and that's the problem. I read today someone said the weakest link is Parliament now. They have effectively taken the space of the investigation agencies and killing all these issues that we see. We must talk about the same language if we have to deal with corruption in this country, because when the president orders this to be done and other people begin to say we are being targeted or something like that, even things that are very obvious, like issues of riparian land, everybody must respect the rule of law, and rule of law is supposed to be a deterrent. But there are people who are impunious and think that even if I do it, nothing would happen. Until we find that those people begin to respect the law, corruption would continue. And I think this is the right time to do it, because something has started to happen.
It's funny how you plan to have a discussion about the state of the economy, but the word corruption kind of gets in there and really takes over. And it's unfortunate, and that's something that we hope will change in the future.
It does impact, because
it does impact.
You just read here today that the energy sector cannot get out of contracts they signed several years ago, which are going to run until 2030. And the electricity bills will be so expensive for a very long time because of mistakes that were made several years ago. This is all the underlying issues of corruption that we keep on paying for, and it's just a few people who pay taxes. When we are talking about tax collection efficiencies, and then the headline you see today is that the agents themselves are actually not respecting that.
They're enriching themselves at the benefit
instead of actually pursuing that, we are being told we're going to put tax on fuel. So it's just a few people who pay, and they continue to pay, and they're getting punished, and they're getting punished more. That's why people want to see, should we recover this instead of punishing those who pay. Very
worrying concerns. Fatma, let me come back to you. You've been part of an initiative to focus on fighting corruption in the private sector. Let's talk about some of the revelations that have come out of how much corruption actually takes place in the private sector and how your initiative is faring.
You see, one thing I said earlier, corruption has a supply side and it has a demand side. The demand side will continue to demand, but the supply side, that supply needs to be cut off. It needs to be removed. And that is where the private sector comes in. Private sector, on the other hand, wants to engage because it gives them a competitive, an undue competitive advantage. So what have we been doing? We have been training. We've been talking to organizations. We train. We have trained about over 100 companies on business ethics. And research has actually shown that an ethical business is able to last longer than a business that works on getting undue advantage. How does this happen? When you have ethical business practices, you are able to envision how your company will go, how your company will outlast you, as opposed to doing small deals that give you money here, but there are no structures internally. So what happens when you go, Mwaura and Sons,
you're the wheeler dealer,
precisely,
right? You're the connector.
And we have seen organizations today are big and then tomorrow they are not there. Now, this has not been an easy sell on two fronts. Number one, when we talk to CEOs and we talk to companies, the first thing they'll tell you, I'm not corrupt, so I don't need this training. But you see, it's not just about you as a person, it's about the organization, it's about the structures internally, it's also about doing what we call a corruption matrix. We look at the gaps, because sometimes there are people who are not corrupt, but given our society, if the environment is conducive enough, they will do it. In fact, we say we have a 10-80-10. 10% will never, no matter what, they will not
engage in corruption.
Never.
In public service and in private?
In private and in public, they will never. Then you have 10% who will look for avenues to corrupt, to get something. Now, what we are looking at is the 80% in the middle. How the 80% in the middle, if the circumstances are good, I will move.
Okay.
If it's sweet enough, I will go. So the training is about how do we convince that 80% to move in the non-corruptible 10% as opposed to moving into the other one.
Okay.
I think
Yes,
one thing we must stop is to say there is private sector corruption and public sector corruption.
Corruption is corruption.
Corruption is corruption, and 100% is the private sector that bribes public sector. So when a group isolates and say this corruption in government has
finished the country.
Just look at the sugar issue in Parliament.
Actually, sorry, Daktari, let me interrupt you.
Yes.
It goes both ways.
Yes.
It really does. For example, when a lot of Kenyans do not know the law, a lot of Kenyans are not aware of what they can do and what they cannot do. So the demand side will make sure that I will ask you, they will ask somebody, umefanya turn hapa, you are not supposed to. I will write, when you go to the court, you will pay so much. So the poor driver or the poor person does not know. So which is the better thing? Because I don't want to go to the court, I will pay so much, I will go so many days, so I will give. But when you know...
That's petty corruption.
That's petty corruption.
Talk about sugar.
Now let's talk about sugar.
Good.
Okay.
Let him give his point, then you can respond, Fatma. Go ahead.
The point I'm saying that a lot, I mean, grand corruption is actually both ways. So for us to deal with it, we should not be having people sitting and saying this is a public sector thing, because this money comes from somewhere, comes from businesses to bribe. So we must deal with the issue the way it is, and I think the law must go to the giver
as well as the taker.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you raise that, because, you know, as we speak right now, Israeli police are investigating an Israeli construction firm that is alleged to have paid bribes to, you know, Kenyan Public Service somewhere in the ministry. And so even as we look abroad and say, look at how they're fighting corruption in the private sector there, we can still see that that has been one way to do business for a very long time in this country. But I also want to move this discussion forward. Let me reference something that Daktari spoke about, and Fatma, you can come in on this. You recently wrote an article about lessons from China and India on closing the skills gap and creating local jobs. I believe even as government fights corruption, they must also focus on creating jobs for Kenyans. In 1 minute, how would you summarize that article for those who are not able to read it?
We are not doing very well in terms of the skill gaps. I take one industry, for example, pharmaceutical sector. We have trained so many pharmacists, but we still import generic drugs from India. What India did, they gave incentives to their diaspora people to come back. They spent money on building the skills, and they began to deal with the legal impediments. And that's how they built the capacity and began to produce the generics. Now they are producing 80% of HIV drugs come from India. 50% of generics are coming from India, and that's how they build capacity. If you go to the pharmacy, small pharmacies in this country, or manufacturers in this country, they are headed by foreigners. We don't have a legal framework to say every foreigner who comes will train a number of Kenyans to be able to take over. So you find that the legal framework is not enabling us to do the same. And also, there are some areas where I have elaborated in another article that we must deal with in order to create capacity and begin to be competitive.
Fatma, come
in fact, to add on to what Daktari is saying, look at the road construction that we have. We have Kibit. We have our own constructors here. If any organization, for example, the Chinese, have been given so many big contracts, as part of the contract, why can't they have a school? Why can't they have something within the contract that they are able to help the locals so that we can phase them out? What we do is we give and we give and we give. We don't look at what happens when these people go. And at some point, you have a gap, because even if they go, what would we do locally? taking a cue from India, for example, when Mahatma Gandhi wanted to, they wanted to have their own industries in India, he just said, I am not going to wear anything that is manufactured outside. And he started taking that cotton cloth, and him being the leader, when he took it, the people around him also had to follow suit.
So President Uhuru Kenyatta needs to put aside his Italian suits and British suits.
Kagame is doing the same. What India did, he said we must make clothes here and wear those clothes. America said you can't do it, you must buy our used clothes.
America first.
He said you can stay with your used clothes.
So we need to send a lot of messages out there. So let me ask you this, and this is how some economies have managed to sort of rise out of the ashes. We know that Singapore back in the 70s, and everyone talks about how their leadership created some sort of rallying call that pushed people forward. Right now, and even though some Kenyans are skeptical about the fight against corruption, many are quite excited about what they are seeing. How can we as a nation capitalize on this sort of new feeling to get Kenyans to sort of appreciate who we are as Kenyans, begin to invest in Kenya, begin to invest in Kenyan products? How can we sort of move this or not miss out on where we are right now as a nation?
You can't do it with the existing legal framework. If you look at the entire Asia, they removed the issues of patenting and they began to reverse engineer most of the products. And as they were doing reverse engineering, the universities were doing research to the extent that they are now able to produce their own product. If you look at our legal framework, especially in patenting in this country, they read like you are in England, where there's a lot of money for research to create. We should throw this out of the window, begin to make some of these things. This is what India did in 1970. India tried so many years to get into the pharmaceutical industry. They were not able until they threw away that law and they began to manufacture things. Today, India is a competitor globally.
In fact, you walk into a pharmacy and you once they give you the price of the medicine, you immediately ask, give me the generic one, because you know you're going to get...
you're going to pay so much money. In fact, what we need to do, in addition to what Dr. is saying, let's think about import substitution. For example, we have Bata Shoe Company in Kenya. Why would we want to import slippers in this country? We have slippers that are coming from China that are being sold in the market. So I would not go to buy Bata. I would go and buy the one that is being imported. And then again, we do not think long term, because each time I buy a foreign good, I'm actually employing a Chinese or a European or whoever. I am not employing my own Kenyan. We are importing things like diapers. We are importing things like sanitary pads. So these are, we need to again sit and look at what are the things that we can, you know, we have to start somewhere.
Yes.
What other things can we do first? Let's not look at the bigger things, alafu tushunde uko juu. Let's start from down here. I can do my slippers, stop importation, period. Do not import. I can do sanitary pads.
Let me tell you the problem. And because I have done a bit of research in that area.
And he's worked in government also.
I was helping young people to make soap. Bar soap.
Soap, yes.
Bar soap. And they've made it, they've done well. And they go now for
markets
to the government to get the mark of quality. They are asked to pay 100,000.
The legal framework is an issue.
It's a legal framework to remove all these things, and the role of a regulator, the role of government, is to ensure safety. Safety, yeah. It is not to police people around and say who made this, where did you make it from? To protect multinationals. That's what we are doing. Someone must stand in Parliament and say this legal framework just protects multinationals when we need to develop local capacity to manufacture this soap.
Dr. You've mentioned Parliament. If we get into the discussion about where Parliament is right now, I think we're going to get a bit lost. But you brought up the issue of young people, and I want to talk about that. A measure of the growth of an economy is the ability to move unemployment rates from where they are to a much better place. Let's talk about job creation in 2018 in this country. Last week on Sunday was International Youth Week, International Youth Day actually, and there was a big feat in Kisii. And one of the quotes that's really been discussed out of that was something that was said by Public Service CS Professor Kobia. She told youth to create jobs and not just look for jobs or look for employment. But a section of commentators on social media feel that she spoke out of turn. They say, one, CS, you're speaking as an employed person. How can you tell other people to go and create jobs while you are employed? But secondly, they also said that where young people find themselves right now, they don't have the capacity or the ability. And I'm talking about the majority, not the minority who meet Prof and they wow him with their intelligence and he immediately guides them. But a majority don't know where to go. Let's have a bit of a discussion about that and whether you are concerned about the unemployment rates in this country.
Unemployment is a timing bomb. It's actually waiting to explode. We get so many youth, whether they come out of Standard 8, they come out of Form 4, they come out of the university, they're actually out there and they don't have any jobs. And I do agree. This is the time we need the government, well, the public sector to talk to the private sector and look at this problem in a holistic manner. Not everybody is born an entrepreneur. So you cannot tell somebody just go and create a job. We also need to be able to think differently, have a different mindset, because most of the time when you go and look, when you go and do something and when you go and create, self-employ, people look at it, you did not get a job. That's why you're doing what you're doing. So even though we are telling the young people, create jobs, employ yourself, do this, do that, we do that with the fact that you did not get a job. That is why you went into entrepreneurship. I'll give an example. There's a project we were doing in Garowe in Somalia, and this is a university Daktari that came to us and said, instead of training people that are already out, what we want you to do, come and train within the university. When people are going to the university and they're being trained, it doesn't matter what course that you're taking, you will do an entrepreneurship case. One of those courses fundamental. Okay. Yes. So as you are going through the process, you are also thinking. You cannot force somebody, now that I'm out, now that I'm papers, I can simply go there, because not everybody is born an entrepreneur. That's number one. Number two, we have a lot of money going around and people are being given money, go and start. But does that person really know what to do?
Actually, what we should by now have said or ask ourselves the question, is our economic system working? Do we really need a free market economy, or we need where the government intervenes with respect to development? Most of Asia, which we keep on saying, Korea and whatever,
trying to benchmark with.
Even Japan, you know, Japan's rise was because of Ministry of International Trade and Industry meeting. You know, we should dismantle this nonsense of a free market economy and get the government...
You call it nonsense?
Yes, it's nonsense, because government begins to directly intervene and say, we want to exploit the fish resources. They bring in the money, PPPs, then get the people to work and ask these people to invest in shares so that government moves out of it, you know, and now people have an enterprise that is running, you know. We cannot keep on saying, assuming that people would see opportunity. They will never see the opportunity. These opportunities are there, but foreigners are walking in. Chinese are bringing
seeing
fish.
The opportunities?
Are bringing fish, because we are consuming far too much of fish and the production is not sufficient. So if we want to raise production to the level where we meet the demand, government, instead of putting money in the women's fund or a youth fund, put them together and say we are investing with a jointly with somebody. We create a mega company, everybody owns shares, they can get dividends from there.
Wow, so very interesting thinking. Believe it or not, Fatma, Dr. Ndemo, our time is almost up. Let me get your final thoughts. I'm now almost projecting into 2019. Briefly from both of you, what do you think, one or two core things that you feel government private sector should be focusing on even as we look towards the end of the year?
I think we need to start with PPD. We need to start dialoguing, because when the government must talk to the private sector, and then we need to have a holistic approach and a holistic strategy, whether we're going to tackle unemployment, whether we're going to tackle corruption, whatever it is that we need to do, we must first be talking together. Government has good sort of like these visions and agendas that they want to do, but the monkey is in the implementation, because something somewhere it always gets scuttled and it does not end up achieving what it was meant for, and by the time we've realized, time has gone, money is wasted.
Okay, and Dr. wrap it up for us.
We are in a fixed government, needs money. If they borrow, the interest rates goes up, and
let's not even talk about our debt levels right now.
I think we need to improve on tax collection efficiencies, and we have seen where the loopholes are. Because with that, then we can say we are not increasing taxes in products that would create inflation to go up, and we get ourselves into a cycle that we cannot come out of it. I think if Kenyans, if the culture of this country says we abhor what is happening, we can't invite these people to come to church or to mosques to
By these people you mean politicians or people linked with graft?
That would be a deterrent.
That would be a deterrent.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Well, that's been Fatma Elmawi, who's the CEO of Milestones Resource Solutions, a national director with the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Dr. Bitange Ndemo, Associate Professor UON, helping us to take a look, a snapshot at some of the big issues affecting the economy today. Thank you so much, of course, for your feedback. Unfortunately, I don't have time to read some of them, but many thanks indeed for staying tuned. We were live from CJ's, which is in the Central Business District, and I now want to hand you over to Joy Muthengi, who will be with